All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Cam and Bernadette Bauer. It's May 28th, 2024. We're at Ghost Hill Cellars in Carlton. Cam, Bernadette, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
First question, either of you can answer this to start, is why wine?
Yeah, so we have actually had a passion for wine for a very long time. Our family has. Mike Bayless, who you've interviewed before, he actually wanted to plant wine grapes in the 70s, and his father basically vetoed that idea. And so he went on and farmed beef cattle. And then I started my life in the Air Force, and Bernadette and I actually met. I was in the Air Force and she was in teaching, and we met in Guam. And I didn't know that she had a farm in Oregon. We got to meet each other and learn about that. And I had already had some really good friends that were in the wine business in Australia. So I had been developing an interest in wine even before I had met Bernadette. And we came out here to Oregon for the first time, and we saw the cattle farming operation. And when Bernadette and I got married, I remember we were living in China at the time. And when we got married in Hong Kong. And Bernadette's parents came to Hong Kong. And I remember asking her dad, I said, "So Mike, how's the cattle business?" And his response was, "Well, it stinks, both literally and figuratively." And I said, "Well, why aren't you in the wine business? Because it looks like that's a growing business in Oregon, and why aren't you doing that?" And he goes, "Oh, I'd love to. I tried to do it back in the 70s. And I'm a land-rich, cash-poor farmer." How about you?
Well, you did just tell pretty much my whole life story, so. No, I mean, my dad wanted to do this. I remember going and, sitting outside while he was in classes with various people that were involved in the wine industry. He was really interested in it, and so it was just a good opportunity to kind of bring everything together for him.
So for the two of you, tell me about, you mentioned having a wine interest from before. Tell me about sort of learning about wine and developing your own wine before Ghost Hill became part of it. What was your kind of wine experience like?
Well, there's not much wine in Guam, so that was not really the start of our experience. But we lived overseas for quite a few years, and we lived in New Zealand and we lived in Singapore, so we visited a lot of wineries down there, and it just, the more we were exposed to it, the more we liked it, and we were thinking about planning our space here everywhere we went. So it was just always in the back of our mind that would be something we would do. So.
And that overseas experience was really good. Also compounded with the fact that we had some friends that were in the business in Australia. It gave us a lot of ideas about how we could develop this property for wine. And so after we had that conversation in 1998 in a bar in Hong Kong, Bernadette and I and the Baylesses decided that we would give it a go, and we would start by becoming grape farmers. And that was our plan, and we started planting acre by acre until we got to 16 acres. We started in 1999, and we finished the vineyard in 2002. And one of the interesting stories is that was also my first exposure to Oregon and some of the pioneers like Ken Wright. Ken Wright was a friend of Mike and knew Mike, and so Mike asked him to come out to the farm to determine if we even could plant Pinot Noir, because back then nobody had planted Pinot Noir in this little section of Ghost Hill, Carlton. And so Ken came out and he walked the property, spent a couple hours with us, and we walked the whole property. And at the end, Mike said to Ken, he said, "So Ken, what do you think? Can we plant Pinot Noir here?" And Ken said, "You sure can." And in fact, he offered to purchase the property from us. And we know he was serious because right after that, he and Tony Soder bought the property next to us, which is now Abbott's Claim. But Tony and Ken planted that vineyard in 2002. But first they had to take the trees down and take all the stumps out of the property. So we watched and we thought to ourselves, wow, this must really be good vineyard land if they're ready to do that. And so that's how we started.
Tell me about that process of putting in the vineyard and of kind of starting at that place. What was the experience like, and what were maybe some of the surprises along the way?
Well, we weren't here for that. We were overseas at the time. So I guess the biggest surprise for us is how we underestimated the budget. It starts with a small amount and it always ends with a much larger amount. So.
Well, and as Mike always used to tell me, is that this is farming, and I'm an engineer by background, and so I'm a very process-oriented, detailed-oriented, structured-oriented person, and so for me the biggest adjustment was getting into a business that you can't control the outcomes of, and I think that was the biggest learning curve at the time and still continues to be.
Yeah, he's definitely not over it. So.
Well, before we move on with the story, I'm curious about, you mentioned engineering background, you mentioned obviously the living and traveling abroad quite a bit. Tell us a bit about your pre-wine career and some of the places you worked and projects you worked on.
Yeah, so for me, I grew up in Florida, and I went to Georgia Institute of Technology to become an engineer. I was on an Air Force ROTC scholarship, so I was the first person in my family to go to college. So kind of humble beginnings for me. I got my engineering degree, and I moved around a little bit in the States for a couple years, and then I was transferred to Guam. I worked in Guam for about 5 years before Bernadette got there. And I was married before, and I had two children with me there. And their names are Megan and Becky. And Megan is actually moving here to Carlton at the end of the summer and is hopefully going to become the 6th generation involved in this business. And my daughter Becky is a PhD biologist in Connecticut, but she lived in New Zealand for 15 years after we had moved there. And maybe you should tell the rest of the story after we met. We actually met playing rugby, believe it or not.
That's awesome.
So, and I went to Guam to teach school. So it still, at that time, it wasn't the Department of Defense schools. It was just public school in Guam. So we met at rugby, and it's a small island. So you definitely see people more than once. It's hard to stay under the radar in Guam.
How did you come to go to Guam in the first place?
It's the ballot measure 5 was passed in Oregon, and so they were cutting education staff instead of hiring people. But Guam was hiring people, and I had a degree that I needed to use. So I went to the University of Oregon for my undergrad, and then I got my master's at Pacific.
Yeah, so we met in Guam, and then almost right after we met, I was given an assignment. I had left the Air Force and I was in the Air National Guard. I stayed in the Air National Guard, but I joined an energy company initially based out of Australia, and then I changed to ExxonMobil. And we got assigned to Guangzhou, China in 1997, which was China in 1997, it had just opened up, so it was a real adventure, to say the least. We started a rugby team in Guangzhou, and that rugby team is still alive and well and doing very well in Guangzhou, China. And from there, we went to Philadelphia area and Boston for a little while, and then we went to New Zealand after that. Spent 3 years in New Zealand, which was also really good for our wine development because New Zealand's a big Pinot Noir area. So we got to know quite a few people in the business there. Got to see how they did things, which are similar in a lot of ways, but also different. Got some really good ideas about what we were going to do with our space here from people that we met in New Zealand. And then we went to Singapore, and we lived in Singapore for almost 10 years. And Singapore was very interesting because they are I guess I would call them very quality focused individuals, or culturally. And we learned a lot about wine and other quality food offerings there, and about how important quality could be. So our time in Singapore, I think, built our focus and interest in making sure that we had a quality product. And of course, Mike and Drenda and their son, Mike, have always focused on the vineyard side of things and making sure that our vineyard is top notch.
So I'm curious about being involved in a project like this while being abroad. How involved were you? How aware were you what was happening here?
You want to answer?
We were as aware as we could be. Of course, we tried to work with my mom and dad as much as possible, but that time difference is a killer. We also had two more kids at that time, so we were dealing with toddlers and babies. So Mom and Dad did a great job getting everything up and going here, and so we were just trying to schedule calls and meetings and all that kind of thing. So we tried to stay as involved as we could, but it certainly wasn't what we would have liked it to have been.
I mean, certainly from the business perspective, we were very involved because we were financing the vineyard development. We were trying to help Mike and Drenda on the business aspects of how to market and sell wine and develop that business. And the whole story of how we got into the wine business is an interesting story because as I said earlier, I think our intention when we planted the vineyard was we were going to be grape farmers for a while, and that we were going to eventually get into the wine business after we had retired and we were back here to help. But in 2006, we had one of our winemakers that we were selling grapes to showed up and with 100 cases of what we call shiners, so Pinot Noir with no labels on it. And he said, "Look, I can't pay you for the grapes I just bought from you." He goes, "All I can do is give you the wine that I made from the grapes." And so we ended up with 100 cases of shiners. And we were very involved from the business side of things. So the question at that time was, how are we going to take 100 shiners and monetize that so that we could pay our bills in the vineyard? And so that's when we had to come up with a name, and we had to come up with a marketing strategy. We had to come up with a way to sell it, a place to sell it, and all of those things Mike and Drenda executed. But we were all very involved in trying to develop the strategy of how we would do that.
So describe for me your understanding and impressions of the Oregon wine industry at that time, and as you suddenly had wine to sell and were entering into that business, how did you go about it?
You want to answer that?
It was still, in the just beginning to explode stages. So there were a lot of people making wine, but certainly nothing like now. So it was just interesting, and I think the Oregon wine community is very supportive and helpful. So, I went to high school with Adam and Eartha from Elk Cove, so I could talk to them about it. So, and everybody was just really supportive and gave a lot of information and really wanted to help us succeed. So that was great.
And then once we decided that we were going to be in the wine business, then we sort of pushed all in and said, okay, let's get a brand. And so Ghost Hill, the hill that we're sitting on right now, the place that our new tasting room is built, was a legend that had already been well known even before the Bayless family moved here in 1906. So we kind of gravitated towards the Ghost Hill name right away because we knew that with wine, you want to have a story to tell. We already had a great story of being a fifth generation family farm, but just looking for something else that would draw interest. The Ghost Hill Cellars name and brand became important. It was also really interesting because we could develop our logo and branding around that image. So we came up with a horse and rider and prospector, and that became our marketing label. And we started sending the wine into rating agencies because we wanted to know the wine that we had gotten sort of made from our grapes, what the quality of it was. And we started getting back some really good ratings. And then from Wine Spectator, and with that came people starting to show up at the house, knocking on the door to taste wine. And so for 2 years, Mike and Drenda tasted wine out of the kitchen in their house until Drenda finally kicked everybody out. And then you want to talk about our old tasting room?
Well, it started just as a patio, and then my mom said, well, we need a roof. So they put a tent on there first, and then of course this is Oregon, so that didn't last long. So they put up a roof, and then mom said we need walls, so it all came together, ended up looking like a miner's shack. So we had that for almost 20 years down there, huh? That just enough for 12-ish people.
But we still kept developing the brand and actually getting some pretty significant accolades. In 2012, we got a 94 rating on our Pinot Noir, and I think it's important that we talk about our first winemaker because once we made the decision to go into being in the wine business, we had to find a winemaker. And so because we were sort of starting grassroots with not much experience, we took a risk. We found a young woman who was just entering the business and had a lot of interest. Her name was Rebecca Pittick-Schuldis. And we sort of immediately hit it off, and she became our winemaker. Her boyfriend at the time was a guy named Thibaut Mendet from Willackenzie Estate, and we all kind of became friends. And Bernadette and I were coming back often, and so we had developed friendships with Rebecca and Thibaut as well. And we just kind of learned how to make wine all together, really winging it there for a while. And Rebecca, it turned out, was a very good winemaker, and some of the wines that she made got incredible ratings from Wine Spectator. And probably one of the biggest things that happened to us in 2014, we had a rosé that I thought was very good, and it was one of our early rosés. So again, we sent it into Wine Spectator just to kind of we were trying to figure out what our wine quality was, and so we were getting reviews. Carl was coming into the scene about that time, who was helping us with social media and public relations, and he was helping us navigate that world. And in 2014, we were sent that into Wine Spectator, and we were selected as one of the top 70 rosés in the world. And on the cover of that magazine is Brad Pitt holding his rosé. I think we're on page 92. But having said that, there were only 8 U.S. wineries in that list of 70. So, we're sitting there thinking to ourselves, oh, okay, I think we made 150 cases of that. And, Brad Pitt made 25,000 cases of it. And my father-in-law always jokes that, it was between him and Brad Pitt for the cover, and they gave it to Brad Pitt. So that was our start. And in 2015, our winemaker was in the Air National Guard, and she got deployed. So she got in support of the wars, though, but she got deployed on an overseas assignment mid-vintage. And so we were kind of left with scrambling. And again, Bernadette and I were in Singapore at the time, and Mike and Drenda and her brother were left to kind of figure things out. And fortunately, this is where Eric Homaker comes into the scene. Eric had been buying grapes from us for quite a while, and had developed a really close relationship with Mike and Drenda. And he had told Mike and Drenda in the past, hey, if you ever need anything, call me. Well, we needed him, and we called him. And Eric came onto the scene mid-vintage and took over the vintage. And he's been our winemaker ever since.
So from that, you mentioned kind of some early successes with ratings and things like that. Tell me about the business growth and what was your plan, the two of you's plan at that point? Were you planning to be back here full time? What was the kind of the timeline like?
Well, we were definitely planning on coming back at some point full time. We were just looking at when that might be and how our moves might look. So after we left Singapore, we went to Texas. So we worked out when the kids would graduate, when he could retire, and then we're here now.
So it was always the plan for us to come back. I think where we thought we would be in terms of a business versus where we actually ended up being, where probably there was a big gap there, because we had, wine business is one of those things that once you get into it, it kind of, sometimes it has a life of its own, and you kind of go with where it takes you. We had gotten bigger at one stage. I think we were doing probably almost 1,500 cases of wine. We made a deliberate decision to take that production down a little bit, but also start to build inventory, because we knew we were going to open this place someday. And so we knew that we would need to build inventory when we did open this place. So that was the strategy we developed. And it's actually worked out really well, because we got back here last summer, and we had started construction just a little bit before we had gotten back here. And then we got back and oversaw the construction of this, and then also started to put together our business plan to open this new tasting room on top of Ghost Hill.
So let's talk about this place first. You mentioned this being part of the plan for a while. Mm-hmm. Tell us about sort of design, layout, what you were going for with this new space.
We were kind of we wanted to keep it farmhouse, rustic. So it's kind of a modern barn feel. But we also really wanted to, the views are stunning up here, and you can see there's 360-degree views. So we wanted to make sure that we highlighted the views, and the best part of Oregon is the summer. So we used all the rolling doors so that we can give it that open and airy space, and that you can see all the beauty that the Willamette Valley has to offer.
And really our business plan was that we wanted to share this space with people. We have always known as a family, we've known about the beauty of this hill. And for a long time, this was just a field, and nobody really knew what was up here or what the potential of this was. We did, but nobody else did. And I think it was a real strong desire of Mike and Drenda to kind of show the world what we have up here. And our business plan was to use this space to have small events and small weddings, and then fund the development of this space with that. But at the same time, giving us a place where we could, draw more customers and sell more wine. And our eventual plan would be to grow our business to a point where we're supporting our entire vineyard with wine sales from there. Today, about 75% of the grapes that we grow are sold to Ponzi. So we have a relationship there. Of course, Eric Homaker is married to Luisa Ponzi, and he's our winemaker. And so we, as everything in Oregon, we all know each other and work together. Adam Campbell is very good friends with the Ponzis and Eric Homaker, and as Bernadette said, she grew up with them. So we actually had an opportunity to do a sparkling project with Adam, which was recommended by Eric. And so now we've just released our first bubbles, which we needed for the wedding venue. And that was actually produced by Adam. So symbiotic relationship in the Willamette Valley.
Talk about the vineyard a little bit. You mentioned that was the first thing, and obviously I can see behind you there, but more coming. So tell us about the vineyard development and about what you've learned about the vines and the grapes you have here.
Well, I learned everything I know about from my dad, so it's great having a farmer for a father because you have an instant well of knowledge. He's done a great job learning and listening, and he likes to joke that we have terrible farmland, so we have great growing property.
Yeah, and of course, being here now and being very involved in just about every aspect of what we do here, as my knowledge has gone from here to here very, very quickly. And one of the things I do know about the area that we have the original vineyard planted on, I talked about earlier, that it is a very unique little spot of Yamhill, Carlton, AVA, but also Willamette Valley. We're very excited about the future potential of that area. And I'm not going to talk too much about some of the plans that are going on, but we're talking to Ken Wright and Tony Soder about our unique property here and what we can do to further highlight its uniqueness and its strengths as a wine growing area, in the Willamette Valley. The vineyard development up here, we've planted some Chardonnay because we never had white wine grapes down below, and so we knew that we wanted to do that. And that actually takes me back to a cool story about how we got into the Pinot Noir Blanc business. I told you we started as grape farmers and we wanted to become winemakers. And we had people starting to come to the house and then the shack tasting room, and they wanted white wine. Well, we didn't have any white wine. All we had was Pinot Noir. We didn't want to buy any grapes from anyone else. So we talked to Rebecca, and Thibaut actually was very helpful. And he said, well, why don't you just make a Pinot Noir Blanc? And I said, well, because I don't know what that is. And so we made Pinot Noir Blanc. We were one of the early people in the valley to do that. We got some very good ratings again in Wine Spectator, and more importantly, the people that we had coming into the tasting room really enjoyed the Pinot Noir Blanc, and now it's actually our best-selling wine that we have here. But we are in the Chardonnay business now, or will be in a few years when the vineyard develops. But our real purpose for this vineyard that's planted on the top of the hill is to do sparkling wine. And like I said, we've started a sparkling project with Adam Campbell in Elk Cove to kind of get us through to when these grapes are ready, and hopefully we'll have a program developed for that in the near future.
So with the tasting room space before, and obviously now with this new space, tell us a little bit about sort of the customer experience, or what are you trying to offer to people who come here, and what are some of the kind of the special parts of this space?
Just the overall view is a spectacular part of the place. We really just wanted a place where you could just sit and take in the beauty and drink some good wine. It's a very laid-back vibe. We are not trying to be pushy or pretentious. We just want everybody to just chill and drink some Pinot.
What I like to tell people that come up here, I mean, there are a lot of great views in the Willamette Valley. So I mean, we don't have a monopoly on great views, but we do have a great view. But what we do have that a lot of people don't have is we have the history and the heritage, deep heritage, almost 120 years of being same farmers on the same land. And we've tried everything. We've tried dairy, beef cattle, we've planted crops, sheep in the beginning. We've tried everything. Now we're in the grape farming business, wine business, and now, as Mike says, we're in the experience business. And that's what we try to do is people who come up here, we try to give them, a good, wholesome family experience. And, if that's not enough, we have a ghost. And we have a legend to tell.
Yeah, Mike and Brenda told us the ghost story, I believe, in their interview, but I would love for you to reiterate it here as to why this is called Ghost Hill.
So the road right out in front, Oak Springs Farm Road, used to be a military road that went to the northern border and the southern border of Oregon. So during the gold rush, the prospectors and miners would bring their gold up to Portland to sell. And one night, a prospector had come up and he was camping here because the stagecoach stop was next door. And someone had followed him and murdered him and his horse in the process. So when I was a child, my dad liked to torture me with the ghosts, like he's up there, I see him, and I of course said I saw him too. But it was already Ghost Hill in 1906 when they purchased the farm, so everybody knew of it as Ghost Hill. And then when they purchased it, we had a neighbor that had been up here, and she had seen the rotting saddle and the bones of the horse under the tree. So, ghosty.
It's very ghosty. I'm curious about, you mentioned having a hook when you're naming your winery and branding. Tell me how the story plays for people when they're coming to buy wine from you.
Everybody loves a ghost story, so people just want to know. Some people pick it just because there's ghost in the name. So.
And I think it ties in well with also the history of the valley because. As we talked about earlier, this was a major road. The farm next to us was a stagecoach stop, and so there was a thriving business here. Everyone knows about Carlton and that little town that's not far from here, which we, Bernadette and I, having lived all over the world in big cities and experienced a lot of different things, we choose to live in Carlton. And we choose to live there because it is a wonderful place to live. It has an amazing offering in terms of restaurants and food and wine and different experiences. And I think Carlton gets what we are all starting to get in the Willamette Valley, which is the market is changing to become very experience oriented. And so the more that we can do to enhance people's experiences, and I know that Carlton is working on this too. And as Carlton goes, we go to some extent. And the same is true for the wineries that are out here working together with Carlton. So we are working collaboratively together. To enhance the overall experience of coming to this part of the Willamette Valley. There's a lot of wineries in the Willamette Valley. So why come here? And so we all work together and collaboratively to get people to come here and to Carlton.
You mentioned earlier the kind of the uniqueness of your site here and of the grapes here. So tell me a little bit about as you've grown to see the grapes, to taste the wines, and see the age of the place. What is unique about Ghost Hill wine? What is the terroir here? What is special about it?
Well, our soil is Willackenzie, and we have a microclimate up here, so we tend to ripen a little bit early. And just the combination of the climate and the soil and the slope is just, we've done really well with our Pinot Noirs.
We recently had an opportunity to have. We were at a dinner where Tony Soder was, and I had met him a couple times, but I've never really kind of had a in-depth conversation with him. And I asked him the same question you asked me, and I said to Tony, I said, "So Tony, tell me the story," because they call this Savannah Ridge, this little hillside here is called Savannah Ridge. And I said, "So Tony, tell me about Savannah Ridge. Why is it special?" And he said, "Well, when Ken and I first saw this," and remember, Ken saw it because he came to look at our property. And I think he knew it was always here, and he had interest in it. But I think coming out to the property and walking it with us and seeing it, I really think that put some passion behind doing something out here. And Tony told me the story that when they had finished putting their vineyard in, they sat on top of that hill over on the ridge. And Tony said, "Wow, this looks like just a beautiful Savannah Ridge." And in Tony's version of the story, he said, and then Ken Wright trademarked it. And I asked Tony, I said, "So why is it special? What makes Savannah Ridge special?" And he said, they really loved the alignment of the ridge, and they thought that the alignment of the ridge was very unique in terms of how they could align the rows to maximize the exposure. Of course, they loved the soil because it's all Willackenzie soil here. And then you can kind of see it's a little bowl shape out there. And that little bowl, the wind comes over the coastal range and kind of settles in that little bowl. And it allows, I think, for us to, as Bernadette said, sometimes get a little bit early ripening, which is always important here in Oregon.
You never know when it's going to start raining.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me a little bit about new space here. Tell me about how it's gone so far, and do you have any, you mentioned kind of events, weddings, things like that. What do you have on the horizon for the use of this space?
Well, we were trying to kind of just slide in this summer and see how it went before we started to make some kind of grand plans. And we had really no idea what to expect. So we started out slow, and we've had a couple of small events, and it's been really well, and people have really enjoyed coming up and spending time here. So we're looking to make it a great experience for everybody and see what we can do in the future to make it even better.
Yeah, and we have several small weddings booked this season, and we're hosting birthday parties and anniversary dinners, and there's a lot of interest. I think our success rate is when somebody actually comes up to look at the space, I think we're like 90% they book. Because once people get up here and see what we have to offer, they're just blown away. We're doing, on June 8th, we're doing our first ever club pickup party up here with our first ever food truck. So we're going to have Moe's Chowder up here for our club event. Every year, and we have done this for a long time, we do a pig roast. So we're going to continue that tradition in July, where we have a caterer come in and help us put a pig roast together and celebrate with our club members. So as Bernadette said, we're sliding into this, trying to learn, because this is a big change from the shack. So we didn't want to overextend ourselves in the first year. So we're kind of baby steps into this. And I have to say the response has been overwhelming, really. It's our May has been the best May by a lot we've ever had. And everyone that comes up to the space just loves it.
It's a kind of interesting route into the industry compared to most people we speak with. Obviously, you're in the industry while not being in Oregon for a while. So I'm curious about initial impressions of Oregon. You talked about kind of right at the beginning of the boom here. How have you seen the industry change since you've been aware of it? And now that you're here full time, what are your impressions of the Oregon wine industry?
Wow, it's just taken off by leaps and bounds, and especially when you are coming in and out of Oregon, like we were when we were traveling still, you just, every time we come home, there would be another 50 vineyards around or two, wineries. They were just everywhere popping up, which is great. And there's so many people now that have their own small labels and they're working their family label. And it's been great for us because, again, like we talked about, everybody here is just so supportive and so willing to share and help you out with things. So it's definitely, I think, been a wild ride especially for Carlton, because the town has changed so much, so for the better. So
for me personally, I've never lived in Oregon. So I've been here many, many times. And as Bernadette said, we've kind of been watching it, slipping in once a year or once or twice a year and kind of seeing how fast things developed was amazingly interesting. But now actually living here, I think the thing that strikes me most and what I love the most about living here is how collaborative the industry is. And we've been to a lot of different wine regions around the world, and this reminds me a lot of New Zealand, because New Zealand's a very family-oriented, collaborative winemaking community. So, I had seen that in action. I'd heard about that in Oregon, but actually living here, I've benefited from it. I've made friends very quickly in the industry. People are always offering help. And I think it's the strength of the Oregon wine industry. And I just hope that we can hold on to that, because there is still a tremendous amount of change happening here. The wine industry, there's a lot of people involved here now. There's a lot of wineries. So to be able to differentiate yourself is really important. And, fortunately, I think we have the location and the story and the history here that allows us to create that differentiation. But yeah, it's still a business. Mike always tells me, it's farming is farming, but I always tell him business is business. And so you have to have a good business plan. You have to be disciplined. You have to be structured in terms of how you manage the business, because we are now well and truly in a business.
So you mentioned some of the changes. You mentioned obviously the massive growth that you've been part of. What happens next for the Oregon wine industry? What are you looking ahead to? Is there anything that you're excited about? Anything that you're fearful of as you look ahead?
Well, as an engineer, I'm always sort of risk management focused from the base case, which is a good thing. And Mike and Drenda as farmers are sort of in the same mindset. But I would say the future is bright for Oregon for a couple reasons. One, I think Oregon still has, particularly now, what these new generations of people that are just now getting into being wine consumers are looking for. I think Oregon has a lot to offer in that space, where some of maybe the other traditional wine regions in the United States, have maybe gotten a little too ahead of that group. And I guess what I'm talking about is I went to the Oregon Wine Symposium and I sat through a session where they told me, watch out, wine industry, because there are fewer and fewer wine drinkers, and the millennials and Gen Zers and the new generations aren't drinking wine. It kind of percolated with me. And then I came back here and opened the tasting room, and the next day, 16 24-year-olds from George Fox University, who they graduated a couple years ago, but they were having a reunion, walked in here. And, I had to card every single one of them, but it was great. They were interested, they were engaged, they made purchases, and it clicked in my mind right then that it's not necessarily that wine drinking is dead. It's just the way people want to have that experience now is changing. And so people are looking for experiences as much as they are, and stories, making a connection. That's what these newer generations are about. And we have 4 kids, so we kind of have a good cut of the generations and what they're interested in. And so I think if you just do the same thing, then you're going to really struggle in the future. And we're really working hard to try not to do the same thing.
And obviously, you talked a little bit about the future for the brand. What about the future for the two of you? What are you looking ahead to?
Well,
A day off.
no, my joke is we've retired into a harder job, but it's a more satisfying job, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would say so.
And then being with her, with the family now, and then having the new generations coming in. So my daughter's coming in, but she also has two daughters who are 12 and 15, our granddaughters. And so we're excited about that and teaching them a business and then giving them a business opportunity. One thing, having worked 35 years in corporate America, I could say if I could do anything over, I would go in business for myself. And hopefully we're building something here where our future generations can have something. And most importantly, and I know this is something that's important to Mike and Drenda, is keeping the farm in the family. That's what we want.
It's been great to be back because, we raised the kids thinking that Oregon was home since we moved around so much. And since my family got here in 1906, we knew we weren't going anywhere. So they consider it home, even though until this year, my son is the only one that's lived in Oregon. So, but it's nice to have everybody and to see mom and dad every day and see my brother all the time. So I'm happy to have that time with them.
You talked a little bit earlier about the change in Carlton. I'm curious, from your perspective, tell me a little bit about Carlton and how it's changed.
So, I went to St. James Elementary School in McMinnville, but when I went to high school, I went to YC, which is where my dad went, and all the cool kids were from Yamhill. And Carlton, they looked down upon us greatly. Well, now it's switched now, and everybody will tell you Carlton is the place to be. So I'm a city kid now.
The city of Carlton.
Hey.
But, I will say, like I said, we've lived in cities our whole lives, and living in Carlton, I don't miss anything. I love it. I can walk down to Park and Main, can walk down to have breakfast at Carlton Corners, the best breakfast in a gas station anywhere in the world, I would tell you. And then 10 more choices. It's just more importantly, it's how friendly people are there.
Yeah, when he got here last year and we were living here for the first time, actually, he's like, Oregonians are really nice. Yeah, I told you.
You just can't understand until you're here, I guess.
No, it doesn't translate.
There's a truth to that. And it's good, and we have formed some really nice little partnerships with some of the businesses down there. And I think really importantly, there's a recognition that the wineries out here need Carlton, and Carlton need the wineries. And we're starting to see that really develop and blossom into something unique. So it's a good relationship.
Last question for the two of you. What's your greatest accomplishment, or what are you proudest of to this point?
Well, I probably should say this, but I will say the kids. All of our kids are thriving and doing great, and so that's very nice to see.
Yeah, it comes back to family for me too. I mean, not just my own family, but ever since I met the Baylesses, way back in the late 90s, and spent time talking to Mike and Drenda, I knew, especially Mike, really had a passion to make this farm successful, not just for his own family, but for future generations. And it's always been real important to us to try to help make that happen. And I joke a lot of times when people say, well, they call Bernadette a boomeranger, and I don't even want to say what they called me, but we went away, and we weren't here, facing all the day-to-day challenges that the Baylesses were. But we were, in a way, because we were in the middle of all of those challenges. And we knew that we were going to come back someday to try to take those on, and we have taken those on. And we're here now, and I think that we're really off to a great start at making this, a successful, viable, small family farm here in the Willamette Valley. That just happens to be a winery. So.
Farming is tough for small family farms. So if you can find a way to keep it going, then you got to stick with it.
All right. That's all the questions that I have for the two of you.
Okay.
All right.
Anything that I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover today that you'd like to cover?
I think we got all the good points in there. That's what you always worry about, you leave somebody out. But there's so many people that we do interface with. So by definition, we're going to leave people out.
Thank you both so much for sharing your time, sharing your beautiful new space with us. We appreciate that. And we'll let you off the hook.
All right.
Thank you.